Energy storage can provide a range of different services. Some of it is to support integrating renewables, and some of it is just to help make the electricity system more efficient.
The way the power grid works, every time you turn on your light switch, that power is being generated instantaneously at a power facility. We have no real way to generate power and store it for use at a later time outside of pumped hydro. What this means is we need an overbuilt power grid. We need as much power generation available as if it's the hottest summer day and everyone is home using their air conditioner, when the reality is that's a peak demand. Most of the time, we don't need that much generation. So what if we could store excess power when it's not needed to meet demand and then feed it back to the grid during peak times, which would enable us, in the long run, to not need as much generation, saving ratepayers money? That's the very basic idea behind battery energy storage systems, which will be our topic today. This is Plugging In. I'm Barry Wygel. Welcome to Plugging In, powering our way to a brighter and healthier New York. I'm your host, Barry Wygel. Each episode on this podcast, we will discuss a different topic related to clean energy, explaining complex topics in a way you can understand. Become part of the community as we help to make a brighter and healthier New York.
As the sun crests on the horizon, a new day dawns in our state. A new hope for tomorrow is rising, a clean future we create. Tomorrow we breathe easier, tomorrow the skies are clear. Today we are plugging in, the future of New York is here.
Joining us on this episode is Claudia Villar-Leeman, the Senior Director of Policy and Regulatory Affairs at the New York Battery and Energy Storage Technology Consortium. Claudia, thank you for joining us here today.
Thanks so much for having me. Happy to be here.
So there's been a lot of education about clean energy generation, wind and solar. People are seeing them all over now. Battery storage, still a pretty new concept to people. So let's kind of just lay the groundwork. What is battery energy storage and why do we need it?
Yeah, so energy storage is a really exciting technology. It's going to help us modernize our power grid and build an energy system that's not just clean and sustainable, but also equitable, affordable, and resilient. We know we can't achieve our energy transition without energy storage, so it's a really exciting place to work. So what is energy storage? It's, at its simplest, a technology that's able to take electricity that's generated at one time and then store it to be used at a different time. So it sounds straightforward, but for basically the whole history of electricity, energy storage was pretty much non-existent, at least not at scale. That's remarkable in that it's different than almost every other commodity. So if you're, for example, a potato company and you don't sell all your potatoes one day, you can just store them until demand picks back up again. But historically, you couldn't do that with electricity. So on the electric grid, supply always needs to match demand exactly. Otherwise, you risk a blackout. So power plants respond to signals to collectively generate exactly how much electricity is needed to meet demand at any given moment in time, every second, every day of the year. That works if you have lots of fossil fuels stored and ready to be burned to generate electricity at any given moment. But now that we're switching to wind and solar, which are cleaner and cheaper forms of energy, the challenge is we can't control the wind and the sun. We can only generate electricity when those resources are available, which means sometimes when it's super windy and sunny out, we'll generate a ton of electricity, which is awesome. But sometimes we might not generate any. So that's one of the reasons that energy storage is now becoming so important, because it helps us integrate renewables like wind and solar onto the grid and provide reliable power to meet demand when we need it. Energy storage can also directly reduce reliance on peaker plants, which means cleaner air and improved health outcomes, especially in the low-income communities where these plants are often sited. It can stabilize our grid by providing frequency and voltage regulation, which is really important for avoiding blackouts. And it can make our grid a lot more efficient, which can drive down energy system costs and contribute to a more affordable energy transition. And then finally, depending on how the system is wired, energy storage can also provide resilient backup power as well in the event of an emergency. So all this to say, we know energy storage is really critical to modernizing our electric grid, and that's why the state has set ambitious targets for energy storage and is investing record amounts in getting energy storage built across the state.
So a lot of people listening to this podcast, this might be the first time they're ever hearing this phrase. What does this actually look like? What types of technology is at play?
You can imagine for most energy storage systems, the most common is a lithium ion battery type system. So I guess to give a little background on lithium ion, it's a really exciting technology. The first rechargeable lithium ion battery was developed in the 1970s by Dr. Stanley Whittingham, who won the Nobel Prize in Chemistry for this work and also sits on the New York Fest Board. But since then, lithium ion batteries have really revolutionized modern technology. They've enabled portable consumer electronics like laptop computers and cell phones and electric vehicles. Any product that you own that you can recharge, really, chances are it's probably a lithium ion battery. So energy storage on the grid is kind of like those batteries that you have in your phone and laptop, just scaled up to bigger sizes to provide more energy storage potential to provide those grid services. There's also other types of energy storage that are not battery based. There's lots of really innovative technologies that are becoming available to provide similar services, but with different chemistries or different structures. So it can look a range of different ways, but the most common ones in New York State today are lithium-based.
There's a couple existing facilities in New York right now of battery energy storage systems. New York still has a pretty dirty grid, so I think for the most part, those are probably being used for the things you mentioned, voltage regulation and the peak shaving, stuff like that. Even separate from the renewables argument, which we get to make here every other week on the podcast, there's a place for these in a modern grid.
Absolutely. And one of the coolest things about energy storage technologies is that they're so versatile. So you have different duration systems that can play different roles. So some systems that are, say, maybe 1 hour in duration are playing more of the frequency regulation and voltage support roles, providing grid services on a short time scale basis. Then you've got sort of the 4-hour energy storage systems that are often used for, as you mentioned, peak shaving. So being able to charge during the times where power on the grid is least expensive and cleanest, and then discharge to displace some of the dirtier and more expensive forms of electricity generation when demand spikes. And then you've got the long duration energy storage systems, which are going to be especially important as our grid decarbonizes to be able to provide reliable power for sometimes the days or weeks that there's less sun and wind available on the grid. So I think energy storage can provide a range of different services. Some of it is to support integrating renewables, and some of it is just to help make the electricity system more efficient. I guess another example is supporting transmission and distribution infrastructure, which traditionally has been done by building out wires and substations, which can be very important, but can also be very costly. And so where energy storage can help minimize the need of that extra build out of traditional infrastructure, it can help the system as a whole save a lot of money and be more efficient.
When you're looking at a standard lithium-ion battery energy storage system facility, what do these things actually look like driving by or living near them?
Most of the utility-sized systems look like a bunch of shipping containers from the outside. So there'll be a row of usually white, long container boxes.
I can put a link in the episode description to an existing facility, because I think, people now learn, they know what a solar facility looks like. They know what a wind farm or they can picture what a wind farm looks like, even if they don't have one near them. When you're talking about this, it's important, I think, to realize the scale. Even the largest facilities aren't that large in terms of other things that are out there, distribution centers and other types of manufacturing plants and things like that.
That's absolutely true for the largest system. Like a bulk energy storage project will be much smaller than a bulk solar farm, for example, because it's so much more energy dense. And then you also have a really wide range of sizes and applications for energy storage. So it could also look like a home battery that's on the side of your garage that looks like a small box that's mounted on the wall. And then you could have something that's more refrigerator size that's providing backup power for a small business or help providing bill savings for a customer. And then you have all the way up to the more utility scale size systems that are usually a couple of rows of containers.
There's obviously safety concerns with this. There was 3 incidents in the summer of 2023 across New York, and that obviously raised some questions, which are legitimate questions about the safety of these facilities. So before we can even get to the why, a lot of times we need to talk about the safety concerns. So at these facilities that are being proposed across New York, what are some of the safety measures and features in place?
Yeah, it's a great question. And I think like for all electrical devices, safety standards are absolutely paramount. For energy storage, there's a lot of different players whose role it is to evaluate these products and make sure that they follow the strict safety standards throughout the design, manufacturing, installation, and operations process. Some of the standards and regulations are put out, for example, by the National Fire Protection Association, or NFPA, by Underwriters Laboratories, or UL, which offers testing and certification for a wide range of different products, including large-scale battery products, small batteries, even, if you check the back of your toaster or fridge, you'll probably find a UL sticker. And the other body in New York is the state fire code, which lays out the rules that you need to follow to get a permit and build an energy storage project in New York. In terms of what safety measures are actually included, all products that are installed need to first be extensively tested to show that they can, contain the risk in the event of a defect or damage. The products need to be designed in a way that prevents failure from spreading. So if one unit is damaged, for example, it doesn't risk spreading to all the other units. And then for some of the bigger systems, the utility scale systems, they need to incorporate some form of explosion control, like exhaust ventilation or deflagration panels, to make sure that if there is a damage to the battery for some reason, there's no buildup of gases that could lead to any type of explosion risk. All of the systems need to have a wide array of detection and alarm systems so that responders will know if something's going wrong. There's a hazard mitigation analysis that's done, which takes a pretty comprehensive look at all the different safety layers and what the consequences would be for each kind of what if scenario. There needs to be an emergency response plan that's developed and published, and have local first responders trained on that, so it's clear exactly what to do in the unlikely event that something goes wrong. And I guess I could go on. It's a long list. It's definitely not easy to get one of these things approved and permitted. And I guess just like for substations or transformers or other electric infrastructure that allow us to live these modern lifestyles that we live, there's a lot of boxes that need to be checked and strict rules that need to be followed in order for us to get the benefits of these technologies while minimizing the risks. And I guess the last thing I would say on safety is that when it comes to any infrastructure or technology, we always accept some level of risk every day, whether that's driving down the highway or turning on our gas stove. In the US, someone sadly dies from a car accident roughly every 12 minutes. And every 88 seconds, there's a house or building fire, most of them caused by cooking. So, driving, using gas stoves, a million other things are inherently risky behaviors, but they're just more familiar risks, so people feel more comfortable taking them. For energy storage, the risk is relatively small, but the key thing is to really ensure that we extensively evaluate that risk so that A, we can continue to minimize it as much as possible, and then B, make sure we're fully prepared to respond in the unlikely event that something does go wrong.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And also important to note that after those 3 incidents in New York, the state sent out teams to test the air, the water, the soil near these facilities, and they found absolutely 0 levels of any sort of toxicity or dangerous things that had been let out into the environment or to the ground or to the water. So it was, in a way, good that they were able to get that research and be able to show that even if there is an incident, in the very unlikely case there is, there was no damage outside of that facility. There was no injuries and there was no contamination. And even with all of that, the state still looked at ways to update that fire code that you mentioned to make it even more stringent standards to build these new facilities.
Absolutely.
So another thing that people are talking about, it's in the news, is e-bike fires. These are lithium-ion batteries, just like the ones at the battery energy storage systems. So are these the same types of things?
So that's a good question. It's one that comes up often, but I do think it's important not to conflate the safety of e-bikes with the safety of lithium-ion batteries overall. Unfortunately, there have been a lot of off-market e-bikes being sold that don't have the proper testing, that don't have UL certification, and are not following the strict safety rules that other products do. So like e-bike battery fires, for example, don't mean that your laptop or phone batteries are also at high risk of catching fire. They go through separate regulatory processes to ensure that products are being designed to high safety standards. And unfortunately, while that's true for laptops and phones and energy storage batteries, it isn't really true for e-bikes. And I think regulation matters a lot. Energy storage is highly regulated. E-bikes, unfortunately, aren't. You don't need a permit to buy an e-bike. You do to build an energy storage project. And I think the e-bike fires kind of illustrate a critical gap in current policy and regulation right now that are presenting a pretty serious human rights issue, particularly as many of the kind of off-brand e-bike batteries are being used by low-income delivery workers who rely on these products for a living and whose lives are being put in danger by companies that are selling unsafe and unregulated products.
Is there a way to contextualize or visualize how many of these facilities we're going to need in New York in the coming years, decades?
So the state has set an ambitious goal of 6,000 megawatts of energy storage by 2030. We currently have around 230 megawatts built, so we've definitely got a long way to go. We don't know exactly how that remaining number of megawatts will be distributed in terms of the size of the projects, but we could estimate that maybe 60% of the new projects will be bulk projects in the 20 to 100 plus megawatt size range. So that would be the big shipping containers filled with batteries, kind of power plant size infrastructure connecting to the transmission system. And then of the 40% remaining, I would say probably 30% would be retail. So that's kind of the smaller commercial size projects, say 1 to 5 megawatts, that could be sited closer to electricity demand and provide benefits to the local distribution grid. And then maybe 10% of that would be residential. So the home size batteries, say 5 kilowatts, that are becoming, more popular to provide bill savings and backup power. So we don't have exact estimates in terms of the number of projects, but we do anticipate that these are going to be pretty common across the state over the next 5 years.
And one final question. If someone hears of a project being proposed near them, what are the questions they should ask?
I think people should absolutely get involved. If they hear of an energy storage project being built near them, there should be a process that's offered by the developer to learn more about the project, where it's going to be sited, what are the safety measures that are being put in place, what are the benefits that are going to be provided to the local community in terms of resiliency or bill savings, or how this is going to support our overall energy transition. And I think there's a lot of really exciting partnerships in many cases being developed between the folks who are building the battery and the host community. So we've got a couple of examples of great STEM programming where students are learning about the clean energy transition and getting to tour sites of where batteries are built and learn about the role that they play in how the energy grid is transitioning over time. So there's lots of ways for these projects to kind of spark conversation and engage a broader audience in getting involved in the energy transition and climate solutions overall.
Excellent. All right. That answers all my questions. Claudia, thank you so much for joining us today.
Thanks so much for having me.
Thank you for listening to this episode of Plugging In. I hope you learned something, and I hope you share this knowledge with someone else. It would be incredibly helpful if you leave us a 5-star review wherever you found this podcast. If there's a topic you would like us to cover in the future, or have a question about clean energy, send us an email at podcast@aceny.org. You can follow us on social media using the links in the show notes, or consider joining our Clean Energy Supporters mailing list at aceny.org/support. Your support is crucial to creating a brighter and healthier New York. I'll see you next time.
As the sun crests on the horizon, a new day dawns in our state. A new hope for tomorrow is rising, a clean future we create. Tomorrow we breathe easier, tomorrow the skies are clear. Today we